comrades and friends, we are all going to grow old one day. It is the dialectics of nature. Some of us haven't thought about this prospect much yet. Others are at the threshold pondering it. And many are there already, accepting it or maybe not. Shouldn't workers have the right to look forward to retirement? Playing with grandchildren, a bit of traveling maybe, sleeping late, pursuing interests long forgotten, organizing. Unfortunately, growing old under capitalism can be terrifying, life-threatening, demeaning, and degrading. Older workers are viewed as expendable, costly, and unprofitable. As a result, many are being pushed out, laid off, and fired. Marxism teaches that when workers work, they always produce the greater value that they receive back in wages. For example, a worker may work a 7-hour day and produce enough in 4 hours to equal her wages. So the next 3 hours are unpaid. The boss gets these for free. This is called surplus value. Profits for the bosses are directly proportional to the unpaid labor of the workers. If the workers are paid more for their labor, as more experienced, longer service workers generally are, the profits of the bosses are lowered proportionally. Reductions in wages or benefits mean handing over more free labor time to the bosses. Benefits like health care, pensions, sick days, vacation days are all deferred wages that belong to the workers. Union activists in the Harvard Union of Clerical and Technical Workers at Harvard University, where I work, have begun to fight against a campaign by management to drive out older workers. Begun in earnest after the Harvard Corporation, which is run by several big banks, lost billions in endowment funds after the stock market crashes. To increase profit, Harvard has laid off workers, many of them older and many women. For a few examples, 3 older women workers were laid off in one department by a sexist manager who harassed and abused them, and who later replaced them with 3 to 4 younger white males. Black workers were targeted for layoffs by racist bosses, some of them months before they were to retire. Other workers, afraid of pending layoffs, felt forced to take retirement plans that were barely enough to live on. They thought that they could find part-time jobs to supplement their incomes, but this became nearly impossible when the economy later entered a depression. In some cases, we are seeing a trend where new managers are now being brought in to slash the budget, which includes saving money by driving out older workers. A tactic to drive out the older workers is tracking errors or using what they call accuracy rates. Workers are told that their work has to be done at a 95 to 100% accuracy rate. In other words, you're not human anymore, you can't make mistakes. And it is the manager who decides, first of all, what an error constitutes, second of all, how the errors are measured, and third of all, who it's imposed upon. Targets have become, in this instance of the accuracy rates, are disabled workers, union reps such as myself, and older workers who have been there for years. These rates are impossible to meet because the rules constantly change, they're arbitrary and subjective and are nothing but a frame-up. By tracking every move of a worker, by micromanaging and harassing, the work environment becomes hostile and stressful, sometimes leading workers to quit or be fired. One worker who was run out in this way was a disabled man who had eyesight problems, another a worker with 30 years of experience. These managers who are brought in to get rid of workers are aptly described in the book Low-Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. I'd like to quote, "An office worker may wear the same white collar as a manager, whose job it is to see that the clerk gives every last minute of labor time to the boss. The clerk has sold her or his labor power to the boss, and the supervisor is there to see that this labor power is as thoroughly exploited as possible. The superficiality of the category, quote-unquote, white collar, will be revealed the moment the clerk and other workers demand a raise, try to organize a union, or go on strike, end quote. I am working under an accuracy rate imposed by a manager who is vindictive, anti-union, and ageist. Recently, I received a verbal warning from my supervisor. When the union asked what was wrong with my work, her answer was very revealing. She said, "It's her productivity," end quote. In other words, they wanted more out of me in less time for the same amount of wages, i.e., they are not getting enough surplus value out of me. The trend by Harvard is to drive out older workers and replace them with younger workers in their 20s and pay them a wage that can be a half or even a third of what the older worker makes. Management super exploits young workers who work the same hours but produce more, as they are required to know more and more computer programs and many varied types of computer programs. Because most young people have grown up with computers and are very knowledgeable about them, one young worker can do the same amount as 2 to 3 workers did several years ago. And many young workers at Harvard are being hired as temp or term workers, meaning they have no benefits or security. Our union contract states that laid-off workers, mostly older, must be given first preference in hiring, but many qualified older applicants are turned away in favor of super-exploiting younger workers. Harvard's attempt to drive a wedge between older and younger workers, a divide-and-conquer tactic, is insidious and dangerous. In a strong show of solidarity between young and old, when I was forced to go to a meeting with HR where I received the verbal warning, 30 union activists and students, half of them young, crowded onto the elevators and accompanied me to the reception area to show their solidarity and support, much to the shock of management. And I think it is an example of the strong need of solidarity between old and young, and how that's so important and critical right now, and to not allow them to pit ourselves against each other. We have seen the same solidarity and understanding between young and old in France in the militant struggle for pensions, where 2 million workers just came out for the right to have a job and a pension. Obama wants to raise the retirement age to 69 and slash Medicare and Medicaid. If we can't retire until we're that old, and they're trying to throw us out now, how are older workers going to survive? It's a fight for our lives, and it's time to fight. And it's time to take the example of the French workers and go out on the street, young and old, with the young leading the way. Millions of hours of unpaid labor have been stolen from older workers over our lifetime, some 30 years, some 40 years. And now the capitalists are telling us that we can't retire. Well, this is robbery, and this is grand theft. It is time to expropriate the expropriators, build a work